There we go.
Much better.
Spicy take. Sauron was wrong and bad. Hang on a second.
It's not spicy. So
like
Tolkien's one of the last bastions of look, bad is bad and good is right, and there is black and white in the world, So.
And it's in a service to this grand story and world where almost every story that you actually can get to read is sad. Like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings are the only happy stories in the entire universe. Silmarillion is sad. Baron Luthien is sad.
I think Aragorn came out all right. So
well, true. That's in Lord of the Rings.
Bit. But Arwen is sad,
right? Well, there's so much is sad.
That's just girls in the Middle Ages. They're all sad and wistful,
magical and immortal, and
I think that lasts till the 1800s. Go read all of Pride and Prejudice and Jane Eyre and tell me that they're not all sad and wistful. So
some of them are happy. I kind of remember Pride and Prejudice.
Well, you think.
Kind of.
I'm just throwing elbows. It doesn't matter. So
it's not even the right century.
Sure the Jane Austen stories all have
1800s. That's what I said.
Oh no, I'm thinking of the
even Persuasion has a happy
period.
Ending. Right? All of them have happy endings, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
It's not like Dickens where you're just miserable.
I mean, all the ones I know of Austen had happy endings. So
she only had 8 books, right? Something like that.
You're the English teacher.
I'm not. I guess that's the next themed thing to this podcast. You should do Jane Austen-a-thon.
Nope.
Jane Austen-a-thon.
Nope. No, I think the only thing that's going to get an equally hard no on that is Charles Dickens. We don't have the time to get through a book of his, let alone all of his books, to make a show out of it.
That's a dedicated podcast.
Yeah, that's a big no from me.
I'm sure it exists.
Those were all terrible, terrible times in my English lit classes when I had to read those books. So
wasn't already also the best of times though?
No,
as well as the worst.
It really wasn't. There are nuggets, but let's see. I think I was in junior high school when we had to do A Tale of Two Cities. Right? Was his other the French Revolution. The way that I got through that book is I stopped reading the book and I just read the dialogue. And I'm not even shitting you. I was able to get all of the story and everything like that and cut 2/3 of my reading time off because he just goes on and on because they're serials. They're not books. You're not supposed to just sit down and read them, guys.
Right.
It's
supposed to be in the corner of a crowded pub. One guy who knows how to read reads the story from the week to everyone, and you buy him a beer. That's what you're supposed to do. That's what Dickens is.
Yeah,
it's a reading club where only one guy knows how to read.
Right. So, yeah. So
one.
Anyway, yeah, I'm not I wouldn't willfully subscribe to that. Let's just put it that way. So Lord of the Rings. Speaking of terrible, terrible stories, book 6, man, what a letdown after book 5. So
what?
I know
it had some big important moments. That were
good
and
it
fun.
Is important, right? But it's
so
cleanup.
bad compared to book 5.
Yeah, it's all the cleanup. All the glories happened. Everybody who's died is gonna die, except for the hobbits. They've still got to die. In a way, it is the cherry. Right? It is the cherry on top, and sure. The first third, you get the whole confrontation in Mount Doom or whatever. So you still have, a little bit of the movie left, right? You've still got, we've got to clamber up this volcanic mountain that we don't even know what a volcano is. And we've got to fight Gollum and he bites my finger off. And that all goes about the way that you're familiar with and expect.
That happened really quickly. It was
right.
spending, I feel less than it was spending 20 pages of we need to get to this spot and trying to survive until then. And then Gollum appears and there's a paragraph of a struggle and then Gollum's in the fire. It's what just happened?
And I think one of the sentences is, and a lot of things happened very quickly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what happens when fate decides that you slip now or get pushed or whatever and then fall into the lava,
That's the beauty. I don't think it was fate. For all the talk of Tolkien on good and evil, I don't think it was fate. I think it was ordinary selfishness destroying taking the thing over and destroying the thing, it undoes itself. That whole side of evil undoes it. So you have
Frodo, if you want to look at it from the ring's perspective, sure.
Frodo does the same thing that Isildur did, but it doesn't count on Gollum biting the finger off, right? And if one person is selfish, you can ruin the world. But if two are selfish, they'll destroy each other. It's kind of what that scene plays out like.
Okay.
And I think you see that as kind of the way that in the Lord of the Rings, the evil undoes evil plays out. In a very satisfying way. I don't think there's any.
There was a sense of faith about Gollum in the way that Gandalf had said that there is more yet for him to do.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Is like, because you can make the argument that, sorry, I don't mean to talk over you, but like you can make the argument that like Galadriel and Gandalf and them, they're not actually seeing the future. They're just like exceedingly clever and they can see the signs and whatever. But like, Gandalf all but knows, right? Is the impression that you get multiple times through the book, and even up to the Scouring of the Shire where they make it back to Bree, and he's like, I'm fucking done, retired, like, because he's done now. Like, he could still see it because that's the nature of his power and whatever, like one aspect of it. But yeah, like he absolutely knew that Gollum was important, and that's part of why he filled Frodo with lines about mercy and choice and forgiveness and shit like that, because he was hoping that Frodo would make the right call, up to that point. So it's like, it's not fate in the sense that he knew, I guess, but, highly suspected, and it all worked out. Gandalf's over there doing the Snoopy dance because, it worked out, right? Like Gandalf wins, Sauron's in the ground, party. So.
Hell yeah.
One thing I was going to mention about like the scene at Mount Doom is like, I don't know if it's based on any of his other writings or anything, but I'm saying it's fan canon because that's the way that I remember it. But like, I've seen somebody say that like the nature of Mount Doom and basically the magics at play there is like, when you got to that point, you couldn't destroy the ring. That Sauron's power was like so absolute at Mount Doom that anyone, no matter what, would have been corrupted there if they had the ring. And that's something interesting to take into with Frodo, especially because it's like he made it all the way there. He's certainly losing it, but like, Isildur didn't make it, Frodo didn't make it. We don't have a lot of examples, but it's kind of compelling to just think like, even if you had made it there, no matter how you made it there, the ring was going to win no matter what, because that was the nature of it, and that's what it was designed to do. And so like, that's another thought, like Sauron isn't that worried about it because no one can destroy the ring, and so it makes it even more important that it's this struggle / accident that destroys the ring, because that kind of pushes it back into fate, in the sense that it's like, if he slips and falls, I should have put some fucking guardrails up, I guess, because I didn't expect that to happen, so, but
nobody's dumb enough to fall into the lava.
Maybe I don't need rails on your volcano.
Mordor has a budget to keep. Construction in the volcano, frivolous.
Or have a boot station, right? He didn't expect hobbits with their sweaty feet to be running around. Like, he should have put work boots and hard hats only past this point signs or something, so.
They all know abiding them hobbits. So,
yeah.
I think a third example for the place just being a bad place was that, I think, wasn't there that line about the light given him by Galadriel? Was it Galadriel? Yeah, the light, that just didn't even shine any light, and that's how dark it was there. Right. There's interplay of light and darkness a lot through the Lord that just runs through Middle Earth,
right?
Where that's just another thing. But this is the seat of the great evil's power,
right?
But it's and on the top of that, I just go back to that line. I think it was in Fellowship, "The pity of Bilbo shall rule the fate of many."
Sure,
something like that. And so pity towards Gollum and having pity on him.
Pity's what stayed his hand. Yada,
right,
yada.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, and then you get that great end. I think in parallel, Gollum as well as Sauron, with somebody like Saruman Sharky in the Scouring of the Shire, who wants, it's like he wants to die a bloody death so that he could, he tries to kill Frodo a couple times. He tries to lie to them, I will curse your lands if you kill me. And Frodo instead just responds with repeated, don't kill him, don't kill him.
Right.
Of course, yeah, sure, he deserves it, but still don't kill him. Let's not. So, because what happens is you end up, if you take those means of just killing, you end up like that poor corrupted hobbit who's Sharky's buddy. It just kind of sneers at him. Was that who it was?
You mean Lotho?
Well, not Lotho. It was actually the guy who's
wasn't
the very last
Lotho
one.
dead? Yeah,
It was the
very last guy. Was there and killed him, but
it was like
yeah,
it was like the guy who's kind of like the Hobbit version of Wormtongue, the Hobbit version of just almost like a Hobbit. Was it Bill? It was the very last.
And
it was
Bill,
the very last
Bill was
guy
a
who was
man.
kind of just sneering at him. You better not talk to me like that because you'll make Sharky angry.
There's a few of them.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. No, and I mean I get what you're saying, and like, there's arguments to be made about that with, why Elrond didn't do in Isildur, right? That it's just like, it not pity per se, but shock and dismay are certainly present, but just the whole idea that it's like if Isildur had killed him, then Isildur would have just been corrupted as well, because that's an evil act at the heart of evil. Isildur is just going to take the ring by force, which is, something you see Aragorn concerned about numerous times, not even just with the ring, but with taking Gondor. Like, you got to do things in the right way. So yeah, it'd be super easy to kill Sharky, but that's not the right way to do it. Like, right. I read between the lines and I took it more as like, dude should die and probably will die, like to the point where, I was almost like, Frodo's over here stumping for a trial. That's all he wants. He wants dude to get his due, which is like, still, you just like ravage the Shire, which has never been ravaged before. They're gonna string this guy up. But like I didn't think Frodo was saying, let's just not kill him, period. He was saying, we're not gonna do it now. We're not gonna do it in anger, because like that's not
Maybe
the way to do things.
So.
But
and still I think though that we know what happens to the Shire without looking at it appendix, because it says that this was the second battle in the Shire and the last battle in the Shire ever. So the Shire managed to avoid the kind of perpetual cycle of corruption by not killing Sharky in anger. And I think that's
sure.
Maybe that's too much of a read into the story, but
I could see it. I'd say it's just more like the nature of hobbits and all of that anyway.
Well, it's the nature of hobbits to be corrupted at the height of power, the height of the power of darkness, right? That's
one out of one.
It's not the nature of hobbits to be corrupted. They were the most resistant to it because they're so simple, and not in a bad way, but like there's like
because they don't have they don't have drive. They don't have the same desires of the other races.
Like when Sam is holding the ring and he's trying to get back Frodo or something, he feels like he has this idea of like he could be the one leading the army in the charge, and he could be Sam the Strong and all the things. But it's like, no, he's not that person. He just wants his own little simple garden. He doesn't want to have a kingdom to order other people to take care of it. He wants to take care of something small with his own hands. The humility of hobbits it keeps them from being corrupted because they're simple.
But not utterly, right? It's not like a Tom Bombadil.
Right.
Who can't be corrupted.
Hobbits
eventually become corrupted, but it's just they are the least corruptible of the mortal races to the best of our knowledge, reading or experiencing.
Right. And I think that's all true. But I do think that it could have been possible for hobbits to become the orc version of hobbits. If orcs are twisted elves, it's possible. It would have been possible for hobbits to become twisted hobbits, but orcs avoided that even at the height of their distress.
Orcs did get pushed, so it's the same thing. Do you think Gollum would have been Warlord Gollum if he hadn't found the
well, that's true.
Deagle hadn't found the ring.
The petty little dreams of petty little tyrants, but you still have Lotho, right? His petty little dream.
Again, did he was he like that before Sharky showed up? You know.
Well, there's kind of a lingering corruption. It comes home to you in a way.
Well, but there does seem to be a heavy implication that his going after Bag End for so long might have been pushed by Sharky or Saruman, however you want to call him. And because then he also kept buying up the rest of the Shire and no one knew where he was getting the money. But it's also the same type of whispering that would have worked on Theoden, of just like, you want this thing and it's due to you. And it's just that the evil little whisper on your shoulder that's constantly pushing.
Greed, right?
And they
develop the appetite and then you just have to keep consuming.
Right. They do talk about how like this had been going on for years potentially, right? You know, that like that's where Saruman got Longbottom Leaf or whatever that, you know, they found in the sacking of Isengard, because he had been selling the good stuff to Saruman potentially for years. So yeah, dude did have his hooks in there already, you know. It's kind of post facto in a way, in my opinion. You know, it's just like after the fact, you know, like, oh, by the way, this has been going on the whole time. Your computer is struggling.
It's done this a few times.
You're either in a found footage horror movie or a sci-fi cyberpunk dystopia.
I'm just waiting for somebody to stand up under the covers behind you, you know. So like, I tell you to run, but it's already too late. So
screen cut to black. Only 3 people left.
I'm in the house.
Figure out how to readjust.
But yeah, so I mean, it was interesting, and in a way, it was like, you know, it was like some polish on the story where it was like, hey, guess what? The hobbits weren't just like. It's funny to me too, because I feel like the tone shifts entirely, right? Because when you've got the hobbits, the Battle of Pelennor Fields, they're barely surviving. They're totally considered in the way and get lucky, right? You know, which Dresden Files readers, we all know what lucky looks like. So, you know, like you've got that whole, you know, the whole, like, I helped fell the Witch King and whatever. But then you turn around and they're like, raise a hobbit army. And they're like, we're messengers of the king and we're total badasses. And it's like, yeah, I mean, for what passes around here, but heaven forbid an actual writer of Rohan come through, you know, or something like that. So,
it's one of those. My grand thesis for Lord of the Rings is it's about that kind of scaling the great conflicts down, and how the evil just has diminishing returns. Because even Sauron, if we get into the lore, Sauron is not the great evil of Middle Earth. He's like
he's his right-hand man.
Right. He's the lieutenant. And Saruman became Sauron's henchman. And now Saruman himself is reduced to Sharky. And so at every level, there's this conflict between good and evil. And yes, there's enduring sufferings. That party tree's never coming back, Sam. Sorry, but it's not. Right? So there's the enduring sufferings that get inflicted, and the curses and all these things. But it's that kind of, I think it's that kind of struggle that happens at every level. And yeah, the hobbits are outmatched in the Fields of the Great, just as men would be outmatched in the, you know, the conflict of the Valar. But it's no less dire to them because it seems so small. It's no less because it's home. It's what they know, and it's their way of participating in this kind of grand conflict. And some of them being corrupted, and some of them not. And some, like Farmer Cotton, wanting to resist, and being the only sensible one, and only able to rouse everyone once the heroes arrive back home. Right. So, I do think, yeah, there. But if you look at it as some kind of objective measure, the hobbits are nothing. But who's to say that there is any real objective measure in terms of these very personal conflicts? What you have is what you have. And the good hobbits who come back home stand against Sharky. And Merry and Pippin, of all people, rather than Frodo and Sam. Like, the least of the 4 hobbits are the ones who are the great heroes.
Well, they definitely become heroes by the end.
Have the great fortunes after this battle, right?
Yeah.
Those two and Farmer Cotton.
Right. Well,
because wasn't even a character really before. He has more lines in The Scouring than he did any time beforehand. I don't even know if he showed up in Fellowship.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I mean it's interesting because at the end they're very much, old-timey heroic, right? Because they're several like feet taller than when they left. They've got their armor and arms from, their various kingdoms, and that sort of thing from either Rohan or Gondor and the like, and they're just running around with shields and swords and just being badasses. And it's like hobbits have never had that. They've never had armor, like Bilbo was like the only, piece of armor they've had in hundreds of years, basically ever. And he was gifted that by a dwarf and they barely understood, what it was. So it's all just kind of interesting because it's a lot more old school epic. I think at the end, the images that come to my head with them just on patrol on their horse with their armor and shields and stuff. So
even at the Prancing Pony, the reception is so different, right?
Right.
And they could have been lost in the crowd or like get out of my way, kind of little worthless pieces of nothing. And they're there with Gandalf. They're clad in full gear with fancy swords and full armor, and everyone's just in shock and awe at these hobbits. Are they hobbits?
Right.
Yeah.
You're what grade is it you teach, Ben?
I'll be next year. Actually, I'll be doing seniors in high school, but also sophomores. I've usually just on freshmen and sophomores.
Okay, can you tell me ages for that, just so I'm sure?
Oh yeah. So it's like 17, 18.
Okay.
Is the seniors, and then sophomores is like 2 years younger than that, 15, 16. Yeah.
Seniors is about to graduate, so whatever you guys call that, and
before going to uni, before your gap year.
Yeah.
Do you have gap year in Denmark?
You can choose to have a gap year, I guess, like a sabbatical, but it's not normal.
No, it isn't. Okay,
it's not uncommon either. Often, people after gymnasium, which is like we have, primary school, then gymnasium, and then university. And gymnasium and primary school are kind of mixed together into one for what that would be your high school. But here it's separate. But after gymnasium, often, or not uncommonly, people take like a year off, and they're substitute teachers in primary schools, like stuff like that.
So it's okay. I thought doesn't Denmark have one of those kind of multi-track things where you can either go on be in the trades or be in college?
Mm-hmm. Kind of after primary school, then you can choose to go to gymnasium, which would then usually lead into a university, or there are some trade educations that need the gymnasium to get in. But or you can just go straight from primary school to trade schools if you want to do that instead.
Sure. Oh, why do you ask though?
I was actually wondering, since you teach history, and I don't know if it would be more interesting or not. Like, obviously, even though he says there are some clear parallels to war and stuff in our world and life. Would it be possible to be like, Lord of the Rings, you all know it. We're going to read it, and we're going to talk about the parallels of what happened at the time of the war and stuff like that for history.
Mm-hmm. So you're asking like real world parallels to particular battles?
To Lord of the Rings. To
battles?
I think the overall thing.
The overall things in the book.
I want to...
I think what
you
probably do is probably more literary with that. Like you'd compare it more to grand epics. You compare it more to things like Beowulf or which is Tolkien's direct main literary influence.
I was mostly just wondering, is there a way to sneak it into history lessons?
We actually do have an elective for seniors in history. They choose a topic, and one of the topics is Tolkien. Right, so you can do that, but I think the natural place for it is probably more literary, because it's really more about literary tropes and literary parallels and this kind of moral vision of. I think that more naturally fits it. You can do, though. I'm pretty sure. I know I've seen some people try to do kind of like historical analysis of here's where some of the customs and some of the battles and some of the history of our real world stuff is influenced. Riders of Rohan are kind of more like this culture. The Gondor is kind of more like this culture. Then you see that sort of thing.
I mean, that's not only Lord of the Rings. That's just fiction in general. You could actually have some really interesting, like let's take Codex Alera as an example. That's Roman influence, like culture, right? Or other, like I think in Stormlight, they're all like based on different cultures. I was just thinking, like, because what I was thinking, totally off track anyway, but was how much shit Justin was talking about Dickens and how much he hated it, and how you could, and I didn't know if it was relevant to specifically history, because it's more factual in history than trying to get fiction in there, but just a way to make it more fun and interesting. It was just like a side thought I had.
I think one of the challenges there is the place you'd put Lord of the Rings, I think, would be something like Song of Roland, which was very, if you read it, it's very kind of very explicit about its purposes being about. I think Song of Roland is about this kind of tormented choice between choosing to fight for yourself and for your own glory, for your own honor, versus choosing to serve your king. And it's got kind of a moral vision there, and even a religious vision there. That's the Song of Roland. And I think that kind of literature, which is kind of high medieval, but about the age of Charlemagne, is kind of like what Lord of the Rings is doing. That's the kind of comparison I make. It's that kind of, it has that kind of purpose, that kind of vision, and that kind of quasi-historical setting that's really more about the present day, or really about eternal things, than about any particular age. So I think in that way, I'd probably place something like this. If you had some literary figure in the late 1200s get very wistful about old even I think it's pre-Norman conquest English world. Actually, you know what it's actually a lot like Arthurian legend, apparently. Do you know much about the Arthurian mythos and how that's used?
I think I would say I know the stuff most people know, and
right.
maybe a little more, but then again, I'm not sure if it's true or based that's from other books. How they use Arthurian legend in their books.
Well, that's just it, because it's one of the key features of Arthurian legend. I've just learned this, actually. I was trying to reread Sword in the Stone. I was complaining about it online to some friends of mine. It's the first part of an modern Arthurian take. Apparently, the key point of Arthurian legend is that it's supposed to be a mess of every thought, every influence, everything. It's supposed to be kind of like the Dresden Files in that way, where it's you're just blending everything you've ever read into one story, right? So it's not supposed to be
never, and how every folklore and everything is kind of
exactly. So T.H. White's The Sword in the Stone, which is the first part of his Once a Huge King, his take on Arthurian legend blends griffins and witches and Robin Hood, all in and quests and all sorts of other folkloric things to tell a very modern, political, almost anarchist political treatise. That's kind of what the Once a Future King is. So in that way, where you have, it's not really allegory, but it's kind of just you're getting a point across using everything you've ever known. That's kind of what people do with Arthurian legend just in general. Most takes on Arthurian legend have that kind of blend of myth, the blend of uses, all to serve some other point. And so I think Lord of the Rings, while I think it veers more strongly on the literary story side of things, is kind of like Arthurian legend in that it uses lots of different pieces, lots of different ingredients from a lot of different places to create something with a coherent flavor. I think Tolkien was very explicit about wanting to create kind of an imaginary world full of Northern European mythology.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean,
yeah, it's very explicit.
I don't know if I shared that with you guys. I can find it someday, I guess. There's like places here in Denmark that are very clearly what inspired a lot of Lord of the Rings, like places and names. I think Helm's Deep amongst others. I think he had a big affinity for Northern Europe.
And I'm honestly glad of that we were talking in the pre-show about Hitler. I'm glad he was alive during Hitler, so that when Nazis tried to appropriate Tolkien, he could say, "No, that's not what I'm getting at." He was definitely not a pro-Nordic racist. He was,
Yeah, no, it was more. It was like it was the culture and folklore that fascinated him.
It was honest love,
right?
yeah, an honest love of a people group rather than, and which is great considering if you think about how Englishmen think about the Vikings even to this day, right? I don't think that there's maybe that prejudice isn't there anymore, but even recently, 150 years ago, there was still that kind of prejudice, I think, against Scandinavians, for just being barbarians.
Have you heard EG talk to Andreas? It still exists.
Well,
he's still alive
that's
and well.
for the memes, man. I don't know. EG's performance artist.
EG lives his art.
Wow. Okay. Well, maybe when he's off of 4chan, we can ask him about it. Whole.
But yeah, but it's just the thought I had with the whole thing, because one of my friends who teaches what would be 17, 18-year-olds, the thing after primary school, gymnasium.
Sure.
He does what's it called? I guess contemporary history, like what's happening right now, all that, like social studies,
current events,
current
events class. Yeah.
Yeah.
Social studies is actually most schools in the U.S. have social studies rather than history for that reason, to be kind of like a current events. Here are social classes, social movements.
And he uses his passion, like he plays role-playing games and D&D and stuff, and he uses that, and he makes character sheets for politicians, and they act out stuff and stuff like that. So that's why I had a thought that if you could, with history, if one could work in Tolkien or other fiction that people might know, that would be good parallels to, because that's often, like you said, Once Upon a Time, that usually, I think it was for movies or books, the stories, they are parallels to real life and stuff like that. I don't exactly remember. I can't quote you exactly.
Oh.
I think you know what I mean.
You got the idea. I'm sure you got the idea.
Yeah. So
I know. I think they're. I think with especially Lord of the Rings, but most stories, if they're if they feel real, it's probably because there's some real some reality that's reflected in them, or that you see through them more clearly. So I think there's definitely a dynamic in that in old good stories. It's not if it's just about the people who don't exist doing things that didn't happen, and that's all there really is to it. It's not very satisfying. But with and since we all got here because of Dresden Files, there's a real sense of thirst for justice and truth and finding things out and doing the right thing, even in a flawed character like Harry Dresden. I think there's an attraction to that kind of character because, and not just because of his flaws, but really because of his virtues too. Whatever he says about himself, he still is a fighter for good and trying to be a fighter for good. He's not trying to be an edgelord. Right? So,
no, it comes accidentally.
That's just who he is.
Well, he wants to be Spider-Man.
And just to break in to make sure that this is footnote and said, we're all aware Tolkien was in World War I, right? So there probably is a reason why the geopolitics of Europe get reflected there, the wars get reflected there.
No matter how much he seems to say that from what I remember, he's quite adamant about it, that he was not doing anything of the sort.
Yeah, he hated he really hated allegory, but I think he also did have a real love for languages and small things and doing small things with your own hands. And I think if there's a point where Tolkien kind of tips his hand a bit, that maybe a bit too much, it's when Sam is tempted and he just has that moment of he doesn't want to be great, he just wants to do things with his hands. So that's the cure, right? That's the.
I like to do things with my hands too. Just shake the. Oh, sorry.
Poor kids.
I mean, no, not the kids. I was thinking of Sneaker and Stinker, but whatever.
Okay, I don't know, Sneaker and Stinker. Oh, okay, yeah.
Gollum. That was what he called Gollum.
I see.
So
yeah.
Sam can still work with his hands, wet work, but but I mean, what you're saying though, like that moment is also reflected at the end after everybody goes over, to the West and everything like that, is he goes home and he has dinner with his family, like roll credits, like, that was a pretty interesting way to finally end it all, in my opinion, after the raising of the Shire and weepy farewells and all of this stuff, is that, Sam goes home to his family. That's all he ever wanted. So,
right. And the Cottons are promised wealth by the narrator, promised wealth and prestige from this day forward, and they may their stars shine ever brighter, sort of thing. So it's a happy ending
sunset.
in the midst of, and I think the Scar in the Shire is important for the story for the reasons said. But I understand with movie adaptations, you have to take some things out.
No, and yeah, I mean, for sure, because that was one thing that I briefly thought of, is like, how would they have ever squeezed this into the movie?
It's like a whole other movie, right? It's
right.
like a short you would show at the end of the movie.
Yeah, right. Well, and that, I mean, that's a thought too. Like, just release like a 30-minute, PS, this is Lord of the Rings 3.5, Return of the King. This time it's personal, so.
Right.
Or Return of the Kings, so.
Right.
But yeah, because it is important to the story and everything like that. And so, if your only experience of Lord of the Rings is watching the movies, you really are kind of missing out on some of that. But wonderfully, if you have questions, there's this part of the story, and there's 20 volumes that might have answers for everything else you might ask. So
yeah, it does seem to be, if you take out the scouring, you miss some of what's become of Frodo. I mean, the movies do show that he is damaged from literally wounds, but also from the ring and everything like that. But how he moves so hard towards mercy is because he knows what it is to be that corrupted, pitiful fool. As much, when he was in the grips of the ring, he knows how bad it is. And so it's like, when other people are being just as corrupted, it's like they deserve mercy, just like he was given, just like he was advised to give. And just his change right there, you don't get to see it if you don't have the Shire, or the scouring of the Shire.
I mean, he was doing all of that up to, and before, being corrupted by the ring. I think there is a lot of it leading up to, Mount Doom, in the sense that, like, he wants to believe that he can come back from this, and that's a big part of what fuels his mercy towards Smeagol, and that intermediate part where they're being, guided through Mordor, is that he wants Smeagol to have come around. He wants Sam to leave off, on Smeagol, because he wants to believe that Smeagol can get better, because he wants to believe that he can get better once this is all done. So I think, there are definitely some of those aspects, but like, all of that was up to before being corrupted, right? Or unless he basically already understood he was corrupted, there just wasn't anything for it. He was going to go through the ring in the fire anyway. Because there could be some of that, like, very much towards the end, you get the lines about the whole, like, I see it with my waking eyes, and shit, is that he's in the grips, he's already been taken, in a way. But he's progressing because that's the job. That's all he's got, it's that or give in, so. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. One of the other details that I thought was interesting is the fact that he wears a white gem now. So, because that replaces the fidget, of carrying the ring.
I found that very significant, that after Arwen and Aragorn marry, and like, the only thing she says in the entire books is, because she's making the same choice as Luthien, she's not going to the Western lands. And so she's giving her spot to Frodo. And here is a gem to help ease the pain, or even just like, here's your ticket onto the boat. But it's the only thing she says, and it's like, here's your ticket into heaven, and the only place where you'll be free of pain, hopefully.
Right.
Yeah. Right. It seems like the image then is there's this need for the ring, and even Bilbo feels it, right? Like that's one of the last things Bilbo is saying. He says,
"Yeah,
I
really wish I could.
I wish we could look at it one more time." Oh, but Grandpa, we had to throw that away. Like, I know he's not Grandpa, but is that kind of
right.
like you're delirious, Grandpa? That's that kind of talking to, and to give him something to replace it with is such a gesture of kindness, rather than just letting him let the ring rip something away from him when it's destroyed and himself be destroyed. There's something to fill that in now. I missed that. That's what a gesture of mercy. It's a beautiful thing. Beautiful.
I have to say, my entire moment in the entirety of my favorite moment in the entirety of book 6 was when Éomer and Gimli have to talk about, like, they still have words about Galadriel. It's like, do you have your axe? Like, I can get it. Like, well,
I gotta say, like, she's not the fairest in all the land. I'll be right back.
I must get my axe.
Yeah, like, hold that thought. Yeah, it was pretty great.
I love that. Like, I killed over laughing. I really love their banter between. It's like, Galadriel is an evil witch. It's like, I will have your tongue and teach you manners. but then it's a pretty fun, clever, and resolution of that relationship that Éomer says that he decided that Arwen is the most beautiful woman instead. It's like, okay, you like the evening and I like the morning, and therefore we can just be different in this way.
There's something really solid about Lord of the Rings. There's something really satisfying, and it's despite being epic and making up its own language and all these things which could have been haughty and arrogant in the hands of anyone else. I feel none of that. It seems like a very simple story, despite it being so long and so complex. It still feels like a very simple story told in a very simple way without any pretense, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And despite not having any pretense, it has such flavor and depth and reality to it. I feel like sort of like the critic in Ratatouille at the very end with the simple dish in front of him, and he just enjoys it, and it's just perfect. That's how I feel with Lord of the Rings. There's a solidity to it. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I mean, there's a reason why it's a basis for modern fantasy, right? You know, it's solid, it's foundational, it's got all of the parts that you need for the most part. You can expand on it and you can alter it and that sort of thing. But, you know, going back to what I said earlier, it's also foundationally like, you know, there is black and white, there is good and evil, and, you know, still leave some room for the gray area where like Gandalf and Frodo operate, especially with the whole, you know, giving mercy even if people have been corrupted and stuff like that. But like, you know, orcs are bad, MK, and Sauron is bad, MK, and Morgoth was bad. They're all bad dudes, you know, and they made bad choices to get there. So I don't know. It's all, I don't know. You're right. It's great. It's simple in a way. I mean, it's truly an epic though, as well. You know, it's grand in scale. The entire fate of the world, you know, hangs in the balance multiple times. Got everything right. So, but, and you know, I'm trying to channel the direct line from Princess Bride, right? You know, where Grandpa's telling him about the story. It's like, you got wizards, you got good and evil, you got true love, like, you know, Sam and his horse Bill. Like, there's no truer love than that man has for that horse in that story. But yeah, so it is great. You know, it's just.
You hadn't read that before, or had you read it before?
So I think I started Return of the King, but I don't know how far I made it. I'm not even sure I made it into the Battle of Pelennor Fields, because my relationship with Lord of the Rings was I watched Fellowship of the Ring. I had never really even heard of it, at least not in any kind of impactful way before the movies came out. I watched Fellowship of the Ring, dove into the books, devoured, Fellowship and Two Towers by the time Two Towers came out the next year, completely destroyed Two Towers, like to the point where friends who went to go see it with me hated me after the movie, because I was so critical of it and all of this other stuff. And I was like yelling at the screen and everything. And so when I started Return of the King, I slowed my roll, and I don't think I ever went back to finish it. That it was just like I enjoyed Return of the King so much, I didn't want to ruin it by any expectations from the book. And so, like, this was definitely the first reading of the Scouring of the Shire, and everything like that, to my memory anyway. But that was 20 plus years ago, so it was a long time. But yeah, still mad about the elves at Helm's Deep in like 5 different ways. So that was kind of the thing where everyone's like, you can shut up or we can leave. So but I've grown since then a little bit. So
have you guys read it before, Andreas, Alex?
This was my first time.
I've read it before.
What do you think, Alex? What's your big takeaway? Maybe we've been talking too much, or you felt quiet.
I mean, I've loved the movies, so I knew I would enjoy the story, and I liked small details of like actually having Sam's perspective as so much of the time. I thought was really nice. Like Frodo cannot be the point of view character for his own story. You have to see him from someone else, and because otherwise he's just a tormented wretch in all of this. So Sam and his optimism and his drive to get them going, I think that was really important. And same thing in book 4, when it's just following Sam and Frodo and Smeagol. It's like, I think there was a lot of flavor in that point of view that I don't know if it's missed in the movies, but it's just not quite the same.
Right. My wife's comment and annoyance with the Lord of the Rings movies is that Elijah Wood just looks nauseous all the time.
I know, he doesn't do much other than
nauseous and constipated at the same time. Poor guy.
Right.
But,
look, man, if you've been eating the food out of Mordor, you'd be,
He's been eating Londis. Come on.
Okay, so he's eaten nothing but elven bread for 6 months. So
it's so filling.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, but still, imagine what that does to your digestive tract. Like, imagine just eating cornbread for 6 months, my dude.
But it's magical.
You're gonna have some problems.
Like that was something that they kept saying. It's like the elven magic, not only just with the light and everything. It's like there was something purifying about the Lampus bread because it was elven made that was actually fortifying them further into Mount Doom than
elves absolutely would put flaxseed or something like that in the bread to help keep things moving. You got to have that fiber. So, but
what were we gonna say though before?
I don't fucking remember.
Demonetize.
How sick Frodo looked.
Yeah, he's just uncomfortable the whole time. Yeah. Let's see. I really like the songs, actually. I sometimes, especially in Fellowship, they felt like a break in the story, and it wasn't progressing for the sake of having to have a song. But he was such a good poem writer that, like, I enjoyed them. And then, especially as you get further into it, he'll start throwing in the other languages inside the same ones. And it's like last night when I was trying to finish up, it's like some of that actually looks like familiar words to me now. And I don't know if it's because I picked them up in the rest of the book or he was using a language that I might have been familiar with, like Gaelic. And I thought that was a very strange little moment.
Well, there's definitely also, even just reading the book without knowing any of the languages, so many of those fancy words sound like they're from the same language. Gilfaniel, Olbera. Those two words sound like they're in the same language if you spend enough time reading these books, but those two words look nothing alike. But they definitely sound like they're from the same language, and they're their names, right? But
I poke into the appendices a little bit, just looking at that. It's like when I saw a word in one of the songs, and it just looked like a Gaelic word to me. So I was wondering, like, is that even supposed to be pronounced the same? And there's a whole pronunciation guide of exactly how these letters are supposed to be. It's like, well, that's following the same rules, so I'm going to guess it is kind of right. And my husband commented it all looks very Latin. It's like, well, Gaelic is a very Latin language. It didn't change all that much like the way it did through German. And so it's all the, and of course, Tolkien would have known all of these things. But even a small bit I knew about like syllabic languages, like Japanese is one of them. They often have, instead of letters to make up sounds, and they have the syllables as symbols. They tend to have somewhere between 40 and 60. And Japanese has like 46 in two different, whatever. I'm not going to do it. Dwarven is a syllabic language, and it has like 50 symbols. And so it's like, it's conforming with this little tidbit that I knew and exactly how he had written out with the syllables and now the different sounds that they make. It's just like the amount of brain power that went into these is astonishing that no one else can really recreate.
It's like it's hilarious to me every time that's like his doodles on the side. That's his when he's in a staff meeting and somebody's talking too long. That's probably the sort of thing he was just writing on the side of a piece of paper.
Right. And you don't even see much of the Dwarven language at all in the books.
But he's got a runic system, right? You know, there's like a whole runic alphabet. The one joke that I had heard,
the name's really the biggest thing, right?
Yeah, the joke that I had heard is that Lord of the Rings is actually the doodles on the side. He created these languages. He wrote these stories so he could use these languages. You know,
right.
You know, and he knew of all the different ways that languages change over time. And so you see these little tidbits in the footnotes of like, this was that word, and now it's changed a little bit from the other word. Like Sharky, Saruman thought it might be a term of endearment, as it probably was from an Orcish word that meant old man. It's not necessarily an endearment.
Right. Yeah, like he's thinking old man is in wise as in wizard. So to him, it's like, oh yeah, it's just the Orcish word for wizard. And it's like, no, they mean old timer, not quite Grandpa. The same. Yeah, exactly. You know, that's funny. Actually, that's a funny little tidbit. So.
And I mean, looking at some of the appendices of like, here's this word and here's how it changed in the two different versions of the Elvish language that you don't even get to see much of at all.
Right.
You know, he already made them. Might as well just, put them in there.
Right. I tell people that about their homework all the time, right? Like your teachers year to year usually aren't keeping track of your papers. So it's okay to like grab a theme you like and reuse some of that, you know? So, but. So we did it, I guess. You know, this is what we got. So
are we going to do appendix episode or are we going to do movie?
We're doing movie. So
not
unless
I don't know if we have brain power for an appendix episode.
Yeah. Not unless you want to dive into the Silmarillion or something.
Oh man, that's such a good. No, it's a sad story, but at least you know it turns out good now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that was something I was going to mention earlier too. Was just the whole, like you were talking about how, you know, the raising of the Shire was no less important. It was just like all the battles but smaller. But it's like that's one of the main themes of Middle Earth, in my opinion, as well. Is that there's always like the big power, and then it diminishes, and then it diminishes, and then it diminishes, and then it diminishes, and like you finally wind up to like Sharky fights some hobbits, you know, because it starts out with Iluvatar having a beef with Morgoth. And then Saruman, whatever. But and then Sauron, you know, picks up from there a few thousand years later, and then you've got even Saruman, right? You know, even though they're technically on the same level, he's clearly a lesser power to Sauron, you know, and that sort of thing. And then, you know, like but you've got the same thing from the hero side too. Like, I mean, the Valar are just like off doing their own thing. Apparently, for some reason, they're even like further west, because even when you get into the Westlands, the Undying Lands, the elves aren't good enough to be where the Valar are, you know, so they still have to do good things to get out that far. But, you know, then you talk about like, you know, how men and the Numenorians and everything used to be so great. Now we just got Aragorn, which it's like Aragorn's still better than anything we've got today, with healing hands and his 200-year lifespan and all of this other stuff. So it's just kind of interesting how entropy works in that universe, I guess. Is like it's always descending, even though confusedly, like, the gods are still there. Like the same original powers are all still there, but the stories like kind of funnel that out to the point where it's like, and then Gondor does a pretty good job for a few thousand years, and then we're not telling that story, so don't worry about it. But
there is an emphasis in terms of the perspective, I think, of all of these big great things are happening, but they're also affecting every individual on small levels as well. And that's, I think, part of the effect of using hobbits. Of they're literally the smallest people around, and here's what they're doing to affect it. It's like big things happening from small people, but also it's the sense of, as the war is ravaging on, and then like, well, this individual farm got ravaged, and now those people are like, they're homeless, they're foodless, and everything like that. It's like he does throw those things in. It's not just the big great things; it's also how it's affecting all of the smaller people, how it's affecting your sense of home when you try to come back to it, and it no longer feels the same.
Well, and really, like, it is about the effects on the small people. Like, the big stuff is all but footnotes, right? Like we talked about how little of the book the actual Battle of Helm's Deep took up compared to the evacuation, of their capital city. Can't quite get the syllables right in my head right now, but
Edoras?
Get the evacuation from there to Helm's Deep. The Battle of Pelennor Fields gets its due, but
Were you making a joke there, or do I need to call Amber because you're having a stroke?
For what?
The syllables? I thought you were making a joke on syllables.
Yeah, you got to put the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllables.
Okay, cool.
So,
okay.
Yeah, we're joking.
So,
not having.
Do you guys smell toast? So
not having a. Okay, now I'm worried again.
Yeah, it's okay. Under Bush's healthcare plan, I'll be fine. So, yeah.
Well, and though, if you look at that hierarchy of being, the greatest thing in Middle Earth is Eru Ilúvatar, and though Morgoth is destroyed and is always subordinate to Eru Ilúvatar, you end up with the creatures of the Valar defeating Morgoth, and the creature of the Valar defeating Morgoth's lieutenant Sauron, and even the hobbits, an unknown of creatures so little they're of unknown lineage, defeating Sauron, and more or less, and of course we saw how that went down. It was that kind of Frodo Gollum out Charlie bit my finger situation, but you old meme anyway.
Wow.
Gollum,
it took me a second to connect it to
anyway.
Yeah.
So wow. you have that whole play out that way, but it's the littlest things, even those, if good, can defeat the great evil. However great the evil seems, it's always a lie. Just like Sharky is always a lie. He says, "I'll curse your land," and so I was like, "Well, you can't, but we're still not going to kill you. Don't kill him."
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance to pull from that. I mean, that's a take, but if you really get into the Valar and the elves, from what I remember, like, the elves are the disobedient children, right? And so, like, the Valar don't want them to go destroy Morgoth. They don't want them to do this. And then the elves kill each other in a civil war to get some boats to go fight the war. And so, I understand the gradient you're trying to sell, but it oversimplifies some of the middle.
That's
there.
True.
It gets a little
true.
messy. So I'm like, we only got 5 minutes, but I think it is worth noting that all of the elven heroes that actually do all of these quote unquote great things and fight evil, they were AWOL. They were not doing what the gods wanted them to do, which is why they don't live with the gods, and think about that. Is perfect and powerful and everything, as we talk about how the elves are, they're still lower class than some other creatures we don't even run into, because they've spilled blood and all of this other stuff. There's so much nuance into it, even in like all of this world and stuff. But yeah, like Elrond's dad, right? Is like, chief rebel practically, isn't he? So isn't he the one that like stole the boats and all that shit? So, it's like I respect it as an American because the whole like, sometimes you got to get in, you got to do things, right? But the Valar very much were against that, and as the gods of this realm.
But the men were there, right? The men were originally there in Middle Earth as part of Arda.
I'm not 100% sure where that works out. Like,
because so my understanding is that the elves screwed up bad, and they're finally making amends for it at Lord of the Rings. But the men were there, and as the elves are greater than the men, imagine the victory that would have been if the men had just defeated rather than the elves.
Right.
But and that's I think what I'm saying. I think there's a dynamic in that story, and there's a way to flesh it out. But I got to do more reading. But I do sense that that's part of the story. No. Great book. I think the books are better than the movie. The book is better than the movie.
This is a good book. Read now. Totally. I read the book. It was very good.
How many years has it been, Andreas?
Since I read the book?
Yeah.
I mean, with the public, I don't know what you mean. We just did this reread, right? They were like...
Indeed.
It's probably been 6 years since I've read them. I know some people who read this book every year.
Yeah, I had a friend like that. And I was like, yeah, I'd love them. But I'm like, for me, I would get bored with it. Like I'd be anticipatory, right? So it's like, I don't know, one every 20 is fine. But
a great book is one.
If I try to read these things again, I'm skipping over so much of the travel.
I forget whose definition it was, but that a great book is one which can be reread with pleasure.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you want to reread something with pleasure, then we're talking, Dresden Files.
Right. It's fair though. Like I don't tend to reread books. Like the Lord of the Rings is, now in the top 20 because, I've read the Dresden Files like 4 or 5 times, so it's just one of those things. But yeah, like there's the occasion where it's like you want to read this again because like the Locked Tomb stuff, right? It would be worth reading more than once because there's so much mystery and nuance and knowing what you know by the time you get to the end of it. That might happen someday when I forget the pain. I'll go reread them. But
audiobook's great.
Like, right. But I wouldn't do that generally. Like I'm reading some Star Trek books. I'm not going to reread these until I forget them either. So
yeah, no.
Yeah. Like I love me some Star Trek, but the problem is I'm reading like the Capstone trilogy of the most recent like book, like their version of Star Wars Legends, right? Their expanded universe. And they basically wrote this capstone when Picard was coming out. They were like, well, we hadn't had any shows for like 20 years, but now something's coming out and it's going to invalidate all of this work that we've done. But it's so over the top. Like it's jumped the shark so much that I'm just like, like there's a lot of love in this and there's a lot of fan stuff, but it's absolutely like
you see the children of every single named character on every series ever.
And
they're
just
all marrying each other and having children named Dumbledore. And
not that
you see the Enterprise X.
Yeah.
From the
still
43rd century.
Picard is still a captain at 20 years past when he should have been admiral and, all of this stuff because of the shenanigans. Riker made admiral finally, though, like, like he was supposed to. But yeah, it's just
the changelings again.
Ish, like you see Odo again, but, so.
You see Odo? How?
In the book series. You got
to tell me how.
Yeah.
To get up.
So I don't know that story because that probably happened in the like 20 predecessor books, but he went back to the Great Link. He came back out and he decided he still wanted to be constable of DS9, but it's DS9 2 because the first one got blowed up. But we rebuilt it because there's stuff like that where it's like, oh, by the way, did you know that this captain died? But then we resurrected her and then we blew up DS9, but then we rebuilt it and it looks exactly the same on the outside, but it's a Federation outpost now. So it looks Federation on the inside. And I'm like, why? Like,
well,
exactly.
The reason is you want to write more stories in a Cardassian looking station. Okay.
Well, you gotta have the nostalgia, right? You gotta have the, this is still Cisco's Terok Nor, and so.
Well, yeah, you could have just used Terok Nor. Let's move Terok Nor over, guys.
I mean, it's
all of the fun issues with
Cardassian, the same station, but yeah,
that we can have a salty Irishman cussing out Cardassian equipment. It's great.
Oh, he's still there. He got promoted, so.
What, he was still there? Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, it's been 20 years. He's still there. Yeah, it's just it's fan service, it's fan fiction on writ large, right? You know, like I don't fault these authors, like they're good authors that have written other things, but when you jump into it at the end and you don't have the 20 years of like build up and all of this other stuff, and you read like, where have we been and what does this universe look like? It's like, holy shit. Like, you know, they destroyed the Borg in this universe. And I'm like, okay, like the Borg are existential, but okay. You know, like to me, that's the point of the Borg. It's like, you don't beat them so much as like you beat like bacteria, species, you know,
whatever.
So.
The number.
Well, and to destroy them, like that's like darker than DS9 ever did. Like
no. It makes a different kind of sense when you figure out why and how and whatever, but they're all gone is what's important. So, like in a series of stories, I'm assuming this took place over more than one book. They find a race that basically is like, what's the Doctor Who? What's his race? The
Time Lord?
Yeah, so the Time Lords, I think I'm conflating it with this planet is why I'm getting confused. So they basically find a race that's more or less like the Time Lords. Turns out that they're the progenitors of the Borg. And when they figure out what the Borg are doing, and I'm not sure why they were clueless of this, they basically just like transmute the Borg back into whatever they were before. They just wave their magic wand and the Borg are gone.
So basically like, there's
okay.
So basically, there's like the brand name version of the Q, and they just snap.
I guess you know.
Let's put.
Like,
I mean,
look. Let's compare that where just people who don't exist doing things that didn't happen,
right?
With Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. No,
it's also people that didn't exist doing things that didn't happen, but it feels so much more real.
Yeah.
And I know it's a different kind of thing. But that's why it's reread with pleasure. If it's just stuff happening, it's good spectacle, but I just kind of feel empty after. This I feel fulfilled. I could go jump off a cliff right now. Wait, no, I won't. Not like with a parachute or something. I don't know. I can jump into a pool right now. I don't know. You can do something adventurous.
I just wanna like. Can you swim?
Me?
Yeah.
I've never really needed to. I could, I guess, if I had to. I guess I kind of dog
California.
It's just that you're like, I could jump off a cliff, and then you're like, well, that's dark. I could jump into a pool, but can you swim? Otherwise, that's pretty dark too.
Well, the trouble is, I'm too tall for pools to really matter. I could drown.
You have this ocean right next to you,
and buoyancy. Like
I'm in Bakersfield right now.
I'm over 6 feet tall. I still like to go swimming. So
yeah, but the pools are too shallow to actually swim.
You just pick up your feet, my dude. So, like, yes, deeper.
I kick my toes against. I don't know. Most of the time I'm in the pool, I'm just making sure my 22-month-old daughter doesn't gleefully jump into the water and drown. So,
yes,
we have a giant alarm set right now. It goes Bear! Whenever the door opens.
Nice.
To make sure she doesn't go back.
She's figured that out.
No, fortunately
okay.
not. There's like 2 locks and alarm on that door. So
yeah, we just told our kids that it's a big person's job, and they mostly follow that. You know, that it's like unless mom or dad tell you to open the door, you don't open the door.
Period. She's pre-verbal. She understands no-nos, but I'm really thinking for yes.
I think.
You know what I mean?
Is she tall enough? Like.
Oh yeah, she's tall. She just can't unlock the door.
Gotcha.
She can totally. Yeah. She opens every door.
Yeah.
My wife has to stick a clothes hanger on the door handle on the inside and one end of the coat hanger between a piece of furniture and the wall to keep the door from opening. And then she just bangs on it and cries. So.
Modern problems require
Without-
modern solutions.
Yeah, without context, this is also kind of dark. So anyway,
No,
we should get
it's just
out
in
of
the
here.
time it takes me to get up out of the chair and grab her. We're not like torturing the poor kid. I
Well,
promise.
good parents there don't even want to get up on the chair to grab their kids. Sheesh.
I said, get out of my
It's getting
chair.
dark
Welcome
out
to
there.
America.
Getting out of my chair is
And your
the
teacher.
greatest act of love I can offer somebody. I've been sitting up in front of you guys this whole time.
Yeah.
I'm a fat man. Getting out of a chair is like
You're
running a
less fat
marathon.
than you used to be, though. You can tell.
I'm less fat. Oh, you're very kind. You're very kind, Andreas. But Justin, you know what it's like getting out of a chair.
Yeah, but there's only 2 or 3 like super comfy chairs though, and I don't spend a lot of time in them. So
Yeah.
outside of my Admiral's chair. So, but yeah.
Admiral on deck.
Admiral, but yeah.
Okay.
All right, that was a ramble.
Yep.
In 2 weeks, we'll revisit the movie so we can enjoy this again. And then we'll be done with Lord of the Rings.
And then we get to talk about Arnold?
We'll see.
Hey Arnold.
That'll be
We're gonna
more
watch
fun.
all of Hey Arnold.
No.
Arnold as
God,
Arnold.
no.